Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Lange 1815 chronograph, and this was a borrow from a friend of mine. I borrowed the watch for about 2 weeks, and yeah, these are my experiences, these are my thoughts, and let's get into the review. So we have a diameter of 39.5, looks a lug of 47.9, height of 11.4, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for this watch, we're going to have the caliber L951.5 movement in here, in-house made by Lange. It is their flyback chronograph. We are going to have a sapphire crystal on the front and the back, and of course you have this AR coating over it, which leans a little bit blue. The watch has a 60-hour power reserve, 30 meters of state of water resistance with a regular push-pull crown. And lastly, the watch retails from Lange for around $78,100, at least at the time of this video. So starting off with the dial here, and I would say it's nicely uncluttered in a sense for a chronograph. We have the 2 registers here at the bottom and the pulsation scale around the outside, which does add a little bit of complication, a little bit of a overboard of text on the dial, but still not too much. And because it's on this little like raised portion that slopes in from the side of the case, it doesn't feel like it's overcrowding the dial too much. Looking a little bit more generally, we do have this solid silver dial that's then galvanized to get this black coloration to it. We have Arabic numerals all around except the 3 and 9, which are slightly cut off, and the 4 and the 8, which are missing because of the chronograph section. This pretty involved seconds track along the outside, which of course is being a chronograph. It lets you time things a little bit more accurately. Whether or not people are actually using it to time things accurately, that's not my place to say. And then like I mentioned earlier, the pulsation scale along the outside, kind of closer to the Riha area with a Lange zona at the very top here. Kind of off the dial in an odd way. It's not something I've ever really seen a brand do. And it's interesting because at some angles it's almost in a sense hidden, but you do always see the name for sure. I like that they kept the text fairly minimal. We just have flyback chronograph here at the 12-ish area and then Lange at the very top 12. At the 6 o'clock, not really anything. You do have the counterbalance of the running seconds hand, or the chronograph seconds hand rather. So that does add a nice little bit of balance. And then made in Germany in very small lettering at the very, very bottom. I do like that it's such a simple dial which has a surprising amount of depth to it. It realistically has 4 layers because the sub-seconds here, or really the sub-seconds and the chronograph counter, are sunken into the base dial. Then we have this more inner circle dial, then a dial on top of that, which is another step up, and then this tachometer scale, which is the final tier to this dial configuration. And I do think it just adds a little bit of depth just because you do have a relatively monotone color scheme. It's fully blacked out. So that tiny little bit of just extra architecture really adds to the look of the watch and the feel of it as you just move it around and angle it. It just comes to life a little bit. You do have the classic Lange style handset here in this alpha style, gently curved along each surface. So it does play with the light really nicely depending on what angle you're kind of holding it at. Some part of the hand might be lit up, another part might be darkened. It can almost look like they're bifaceted at times, but it really is just a singular curved surface. I don't think I mentioned it in the beginning, but the case itself is done in 18 karat white gold as well as the hands, so it's nice to see. I do think that Lange did a good job with creating both enough space to where it doesn't look empty and not creating too much text on the dial either. It struck a nice balance between that. There's a little bit of a mix of finishing, of course, from the just matte black of the dial, whereas you have a little bit more of a concentric circling in the sub-seconds. To me, it is just a fairly well executed dial. One thing I will note, and this may just be my opinion, I don't love how the Lange name is up here at the very top 12 o'clock. It makes this little area here feel a little bit empty. I would have been fine with them maybe having Lange here, flyback, maybe chronograph at the very bottom, or maybe just Lange and flyback at the bottom at 6 o'clock here. I don't know for sure. It's a slightly odd choice to have the name up so high, and when I do look at the watch on my wrist, sometimes this area feels a bit empty or odd. So taking a look at the watch in natural light, we can see it takes on this pretty much completely black tone, doesn't really change much, and is just kind of dominated by that AR coating that's very blue and pops out most of the time. In more natural light, at off angles, we get a deeper black, and then at more direct on, we get this more dusty charcoaly black kind of color, probably because it's a silver dial. That aspect shines through. In natural light here on the wrist, you can see it kind of softens up a little bit. The dial shines, has a little bit of a glow silver yellowness to it because of the white gold. And it just looks very premium, very classic, very clean. But when you take it into direct sunlight, it becomes a little bit harsher. The kind of glow around the case disappears and the dial really pops out with that charcoal tone. Zooming in here, you can see how much small detail there is on the dial, how much depth there is from each small little layer to the next. Of course, this really nice concentric circling within the subdials here, and the text that's in them are really crisp and clean. Of course, as I mentioned, the beautiful white text, which has this three-dimensional quality to it, even down to the text here for the flyback chronograph. It has that same inking quality, and at least to me, it has the same amount of thickness relatively as the numerals, as the printing of the seconds track, so it all feels really cohesive. One thing I really do like, and I do believe it's because they went with this galvanized silver, is at certain angles, a lot of the dial elements turn this really gentle gray color, and then at others it's a very deep matte black, and it just has a little bit more life than a standard black dial. Looking at the hands, they're done relatively well. They are nicely polished. You can see at the end of the hour hand, or really rather the base of the hour hand, there are some tiny little specks and a little bit of a scratch there towards the center pinion stack. Moving on to the minutes hand, we see the same story, a little bit of a scratch there next to the center pinion, but relatively clean all the rest of the way through. If I move the chronograph, you can see there are some scratches there on the hand stack itself. Obviously not great to see at this price point. These are blemishes that almost you would expect not to see, but at the end of the day, these are softer hands being made of white gold, and then there is, I believe, a coating process that maybe the coating itself is in a sense being rubbed off. So it's just one of those things where, to be fair, watches kind of aren't meant to be looked at this magnification, and if you look this close, you might find something wrong with it. That same story remains true for this counterbalance here. It is a little bit fuzzy. There may be even a scratch or two along the surface of it. So there are kind of perfect elements mixed with imperfect here. Looking at the subdial hands, you see there's a similar story, a little bit of dust, a little bit of fuzziness. If we look at the other one, pretty much similar story, similar blemishes. Overall, pretty good dial. To be fair, the only imperfections you see are on the metal element, so yeah, take that for what you will. All the text is really applied beautifully. There is an amazing amount of depth to it, and it's a relatively well done dial. So moving on to the case of this watch, and this is the same case that Lange pretty much uses for all their watches, this very defined circular mid case with these welded on lugs. They do use a kind of three-part case with the case back, the bezel, and the mid case all joining in a sandwich type situation. And the mid case does these nice little tricks where it is obviously horizontally brushed here in the very middle, but then it's highly polished at the very top and bottom where it meets these new sections of case to kind of visually thin it out and can make it seem a lot thinner than it actually is. And to be fair, on wrist, it pretty much does work that way. I do find it interesting that the brushing does not follow into the lugs. The lugs themselves are fully high polished on every surface, which of course matches on the top since the bezel is high polished, but on the side I think looks a little bit at odds. Potentially it's done that way because the lugs are a separate part, they are welded on, but I don't know. One aspect I do really love about this case is the fact that we have this very concave bezel to it. It has a beautiful subtle dome to it, follows really nicely from the edge of the case to the bezel and then to this very flat crystal. Just has a nice curvature and a lot of life to it. I really like how these more curved bezels reflect and the way they just look in general. They catch light really nicely and are a lot more premium in my opinion than flat bezels or even stepped bezels to some degree. Another interesting aspect about Lange's case design is the way the lugs attach to the case. Because they are welded on, they have this tiny like little lip there. I don't know if you can perfectly see it. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can tell there's a little gap there between the case and the lug, and you also have this little chamfer along the polished surface. And it's a little interesting point of view. You can kind of see there's a little gap in between there. So it's just like an interesting little point of visual interest. Do I think it makes or breaks the watch design? No, but it's a fun little aspect to have. And when you're talking about luxury of this level, it's all about those small details. We do have these rectangular pushers, which are brushed on the sides and then high polished on the edges, which is a nice little touch. Signed Lange crown, all fully high polished. The crown itself I think is very proportionally sized. It kind of goes out the same amount that the pushers do. It has a really nice action to the winding with this manual wind chronograph movement. When you pull out the crown, it has a nice sturdy click to it. Setting or moving the hands feel very fluid. So really good crown action, really defined click when you push it in and out. So very pleasurable. Now when you actuate the chronograph, this is a column wheel chronograph, so you do get a nice defined click on both the start and the reset button. You of course do also have the flyback functionality, so when you start it, you can just reset it and it will keep going. It doesn't have to be started again. So nice little feature there, and of course mechanically hard to do and mechanically complicated, and this is why this is an expensive watch. I will say for my personal preference that although they both have good mechanical clicks to them, the reset button feels a lot more sturdy, a lot more mechanically sound than the start does. The start has a little bit of softness to it, a little bit of, not tinniness, just, I guess you can just say softness. It just doesn't feel as premium and well defined as the reset does. Taking another quick look at the mid case of this watch, we do have, I guess you can say, a relatively thick watch. It is 11 millimeters, which for a chronograph really isn't bad, but it does hide the thickness very well. You can see that we have a very large case back portion that even extends below what a traditional case back is. It has this like little porthole viewing area, which is odd. I've never seen another brand do this, but it is an interesting point of view because depending on how you wear your watch, this whole little porthole section sits into the wrist, and then it virtually takes off about 1 millimeter or 2 from the case style, from the case height, and makes it wear even slimmer. One thing I will say too about this case is they did go with relatively long lugs, and they are thick, so you do prominently see them on wrists, and it's kind of hard to take your eyes off them. You can tell they are a little on the long side because you do have a little bit of a lug gap with this stock Lange strap here, so keep that in mind. If that's something that bothers you, it's here. And then this is the stock Lange strap, of course, with a Lange white gold buckle to match, beautifully engineered, Lange deeply engraved into there, the nice curves and edges on this bracelet, a nice little bar here to help take off your strap when it's on lower settings, or for when you have a smaller wrist, it helps to get it off the strap hole a little easier. Of course, you also have this little canal in here, so when you're actually wearing the strap, it helps the strap wear a little bit more thinly, a little bit more close to the wrist, so it doesn't have a lot of, I guess you can say, like buckle buildup. It is just a little bit more of a cohesive package. Now, looking at the movement of this watch, this is really where a bulk of the money is going. You're paying for a hand-wound mechanical chronograph made in German silver, hand polished, hand engraved in some areas, and having over 300 components in it. So this is a complicated movement. This is a beautiful movement. It is very three-dimensional, very architectural. It's like a little city moving and living in there, and it has a lot of life to it as you move it around and just look at it. And it is just cool to see. We'll zoom in there in a second, but just to focus on the outside, you do of course have this circular brushing done on the outside. We have 3 screws at the top and 3 screws at the bottom, giving a nice little symmetry there. And then the text on the kind of inside areas of the screws, which is very deeply engraved into the case back. And this is engraved down much deeper than most case engravings are, and it just feels a little bit more premium because of that. It's a little bit more crisp. It feels like a little bit more purposeful, and these are the small details you pay for. So zooming in on this movement, and of course we do have a lot of beauty on display. We have of course this Geneva striping, we have blued screws, we have the red jewels on display, we have anglage, maybe not the most defined or crazy anglage I've ever seen, but still anglage. Beautifully engraved balance cock there, of course done by hand. More anglage. You have these beautiful black polished chronograph mechanism that is also anglage, which is going to be harder to do on the smaller surface. Even down to some of the most small components, they are still done. So it's nice attention to detail for sure. I also do love the interplay between the black polished screw heads and some of these blue screws, because it's one of those things where if every single screw on this movement was blue, it would be a little bit too overboard on color, I think. This gives it a nice balance. It gives it a nice depth of color, and it gives it a little bit more light play too, because at some angles you get these silver elements, these blue elements, these of course red elements / pinkish elements from the jewels, these gold elements, and it just adds a little bit more color and depth and interest to the movement that wouldn't be there if it was just all blue and all a little bit more uniform. It also too, in my opinion, just feels very purposeful because all these elements are done in this more stainless steel, more classic coloration, and it all just blends together. It feels very monochromatic, very purposeful, and to me, I just like that. And another thing that is fun too is you get to see through the case back so much movement from the chronograph parts. Like when you actuate the chronograph itself, you of course have this lever over here that starts and stops it. You can see the gears turning around, and it's really just fun to see this happening, the way it grabs those teeth and just pulls it to start and stop the chronograph. And going to the reset, this whole mechanism is moving. There's so many parts that are in that process. It is just a really cool thing to be able to see on the back of your watch. You could also see kind of really what's happening there. You can see the gears kind of disconnecting and then coming back again to keep it running, to keep it keeping that time. And it's a very fun effect. So in short, we do have a beautiful movement, lots of color and light play, beautiful warmth of German silver, classic brightness of regular stainless steel, and just a lot of cool elements on display here. So moving on to how this watch wears, earlier I was wearing this cool micro brand from Canada called Branch, and this is a 36mm watch by comparison. And there we have the watch sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. And even though it's a smaller chronograph, it's just under 40mm, you can definitely tell how long those lugs are. They're a little bit prominent. I think they're a little too long, but I don't mind them terribly. They do have a nice turn down to them, so at least they aren't straight and long. What I do love about the chronograph on wrist is, I mean, one, how legible it is. You just do have a beautiful contrast between a black dial and the white text. It does just end up being legible at any angle, and that's a nice aspect of it. One thing I will note is I'm not a huge fan of the stock strap. It does feel a little bit plasticky. It's not super buttery. It has like a weird little squared end, which I'm not a huge fan of. And it also doesn't fit my wrist. I believe this is the standard size, and I'm on like the second to last hole, and then the last hole is a little too tight. I just don't like how that wears. So it does fit, I just don't love how it fits. It's not the perfect strap for this watch in my opinion. And although the cool like black on black monotone look works, it's just not perfectly for me, I think. It makes the watch a little bit too boring. And then looking from the side view, you can see it rises up slightly because of that raised case back. If I push the watch down to my wrist a little bit, like if I was wearing it tighter, you can see just how perfectly that bulbous case back kind of conforms into the wrist and just disappears. Makes the watch appear a little bit visually thinner than it is. Like this is the kind of thickness that some watches use a 3-hand movement for, and then we have a chronograph movement in here with over 300 components. So it is nice that they were able to keep all that complication into a relatively small package. Moving on to some other straps, this is one of my favorite pairings for the watch. It's this matte astral blue, I believe they call the color Ostrich from Delugs. I really like this tone because not only does it play off the blue AR coating that you have, but it just makes the watch a little bit more fun. It still keeps a exotic grain leather, which makes it feel a little bit premium, but it adds a color which is just adding a little bit of life into the equation. On this more fitted to me strap, it does wear a little bit better. It plants the watch nicer. It doesn't feel as long lug to lug. So it's one of those watches where you definitely just kind of have to get the right strap combo, and it does wear really nice on wrist. Again, even the height doesn't feel too bad because it's really well planted. Next, we have this beautiful, nice, natural Buttero leather strap. This is made by King Leathercraft, but they no longer make straps at this point, so any natural Buttero with a white stitch is very similar. Plays off the tones really well. That's black and brown combo. Obviously, a more casual grain leather, which I think still pairs really well with the watch because of that monotone nature, and because although there are metal applied elements, it's not overboard, so it doesn't feel too dressy in a sense. Really great combo in my opinion, adds a real richness to the watch itself because of course you have that plain black dial. You can match this with any color of strap out there. I guess you could say within reason, but you know, some people aren't reasonable. You could absolutely have a lot of fun with straps on this watch, and I think it deserves it. Speaking of fun straps, we have this pink silicone from H&S straps off of Amazon. Beautiful way to make the watch pop a little bit. Great way to make an expensive watch look very cheap. But realistically, I don't think it looks that bad, you know? The super soft, untextured look of the silicone mixed with this, you know, serious watch, I think is a beautiful combo. Starting off from this angle, because I can wear the silicone a little bit tighter, you can see just how well it plants the watch into my wrist. And yeah, I just do think this is a really fun strap. Adds a lot of life to the watch like some of these other combos did, but it's also just extremely comfortable. It plants the watch amazingly well. It makes you almost feel the weight of the watch slightly more because it is so planted. Carrying on with all the blasphemy here, this is, I think, a really awesome combo for the watch. We're adding a black silicone NATO, super thin, so even though it's a thicker watch, it doesn't add really any thickness to it. Helps plant the watch really nicely on wrist, and because it has this black on black kind of theme to it, it feels very stealthy. It helps sports the watch up a little bit, and to me it looks great. And there we have it on wrist. I really like this black on black feel. Kind of reminisces of the Alligator original strap, but makes it a little bit more playful, a little bit more fun, and gets rid of that lug gap if that's something that bothers you. So kills a lot of birds with one stone, and I don't mind it. And last but not least, the classic White Archer silicone strap. I think it pairs beautifully with this watch. You have this bright white strap playing off all the bright white tones, leans into that monochromatic nature, makes this a pseudo panda watch. I mean, what's not to love? Really beautiful combo, super playful, but to me doesn't look out of place. It looks like a relatively serious combo for this watch because it fits monochromatically into the theme so well. And moving the watch up a little bit too, I have a closer to a 6-inch wrist here, and the watch still wears well. It doesn't overhang, it doesn't look too big, but it is just one of those things where I do think they can cut down on the lug-to-lug length just a slight bit. So pros and cons of this Lange, and one of the bigger pros for me is just going to be the size of it. It's nice to see that they sized down, went to just under 40 millimeters. The diameter is very nicely wearing. The chronograph hides its thickness very well, so it doesn't feel too thick on wrist, especially if you wear it a little bit above the bone or below the bone, however you reference that way. And in my opinion, it is a good body and case for the chronograph to live in. Another big pro for me is just going to be the fact that I think the movement architecture is beautiful. This is a chronograph. This is a handmade, hand-finished, in-house chronograph, and it's one of those things where they did that justice. There's a lot of I guess you can say skeletonization. There's a lot of view of the movement parts. The chronograph mechanism is very much in view when you actuate it, and it is beautifully finished. It has a lot of high-end finishing to it. It has a lot of beauty to it when you just observe it randomly and you turn it over and look at the case back. So it is very nice to look at. It's something that you almost want to wear backwards. My last pro for the watch is just going to be the fact that the dial is very classical. You just have that monochrome black and white look. Sure, maybe it can be hard to read at times because you do have those white gold hands on that black background. So legibility may be a hindrance to some, but I like that all uniform look. I like that sleekness, that simplicity, and everything's executed to a pretty high standard. Of course, the printing's done very well. The hands, a little less so, but it is a pretty good dial to look at. So moving on to cons, one of the bigger ones for me is going to be the QC, at least from what I've experienced. This watch is the second Lange that I've had hands on, and it is the second Lange I've had under a loupe that has had issues. This one, granted, had less issues than the previous Saxonia Thin that I looked at, but even still, if we're talking about an $80,000 chronograph, there shouldn't be as blatant scratches on the hands as I think we saw here. You're paying that premium in price for the hand finishing, for the meticulous attention to detail, and I do think that their margin's probably high enough to get a better handset to replace the one that's on there. I'm sure maybe if you made a fuss about it, maybe they'd fix it, or at least you hope they would, but it is unfortunate to see off the bat, right? Another small little con for me, just really quickly, is the fact that I do think the lugs are a little bit long. They just are a little too prominent. They stick out too much. There is a little bit of a lug gap between the case and the bracelet, or the case and the strap. So to me, it just looks a little bit odd, a little bit awkward. I don't know what the inspiration is there. I don't know what the reasoning is behind there. I don't know if they want it to be planted well on larger wrists. But from my point of view, they could have made it a little bit more, stout in appearance, a little bit shorter lug to lug, and it still would have looked fine, and in my opinion, looked better. Another little thing that I didn't like about this watch personally is I don't think the dial is as high quality feeling as the case back is. I don't get drawn into it. There's nothing on the front of the dial down to the printing, the color itself, the finishing on the dial of the watch, even the strap that goes along with it. It's all very plain, all very boring in some sense, compared to when you turn the watch around. I understand it's a chronograph, and maybe the chronograph movement and the architecture of the movement is supposed to be the star of the show, but I do think they could have probably done some things to make the front a little bit more close to how good the back is. I think another big thing that contributes to me feeling the front is so weird and just at odds with the harmony of the overall design is I personally don't like the Lange logo placement. It's at the very top, 12 o'clock in the tachymeter scale, and to me it looks very odd there. My eyes naturally want to focus on that kind of mid-upper section of the dial, and the name isn't there. It's just some, other text. I think that text could have been moved down to the 6 o'clock, and the Lange lettering moved up to the 12. It just seems like a little bit of an odd placement for me. I don't know if everyone feels that way, but at least when I was wearing the watch, to my eye and to where my eye was drawn, it felt weird. And, if you're paying $80,000 for something, you would hope that there isn't any feelings of weirdness. You'd want to have awe, in a sense, when you look at the watch, and I just didn't get that, at least from the front. And last but not least, I do think the price is, I don't want to say unjustified, because luxury is an odd space, and you can have things like a Patek chronograph that's around also $80,000, or you can have an annual calendar that's cheaper. You can have the Moser integrated chronograph streamliner that's a chronograph, and that's around $55,000, but it's also steel. To be fair, I don't think there's a lot of direct competitors for handmade chronographs of this quality at this price point. right? There's also just not a lot of players out there for this kind of price segment or this movement segment in the market. So I do think that Lange can kind of price it wherever they want, as long as it makes sense in their range. To put it in perspective, this watch came out at around $45,000 and it's moved all the way up to $80,000. And has inflation increased so crazily that it needs to be twice the price now? I don't think so. Has the watch improved by twice the amount? I don't think so. So it's one of those odd things where I do think as a brand, Lange's pricing itself pretty aggressively. The secondary market, I think, kind of shows that, because this particular model goes for between 55 to 70 grand used. So if you're losing 10 to 20K off the bat, the market's kind of dictating that's what the watch is worth. So I do think those two numbers should be more aligned a little bit. At least that's how I feel about the situation. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. I'm not a luxury watch expert. I'm not a luxury expert either. So it's just one of those things where Lange could be completely within their rights and within their margins, but I do think it could represent much better value if it was just a slight bit cheaper. Also, maybe Lange's quote-unquote tired of being value luxury and wants to just be luxury, so it is what it is. So final thoughts on this watch, and honestly, I wasn't overly impressed. I'm not a huge chronograph fan to begin with. They don't overly excite me just because I don't have any function for them, and I understand they're very mechanically hard to do and they take a lot of mastery to be able to build correctly. And Lange does a fantastic one. This is a watch that's very sought after and a watch that is a very proud crowning achievement in the Lange catalog. But for me, it doesn't have that same grab and luster as it does to some others. At least in person, it felt a little flat. The dial didn't grab me in really any particular way. It's clean and classic, but it's also a little bit boring, a little bit too simple, and the case shape, at least with the lugs, doesn't feel perfect on me. To me, this watch doesn't feel overly inspired, I guess you can say. It feels like a watch made for a watch's sake. It's not a perfect example of a chronograph movement, or a chronograph watch, rather. It just is a good chronograph, and I don't know if that really makes sense. It makes sense to me, and I do think you can maybe get what I'm saying. It just is a very expensive watch that is good, but not great, and I do think it can be perfected to a point. As an example, I've recently seen in person the FP Journe, I believe it's called the CM. It's their chronograph Rattrapant with a rose gold case integrated bracelet situation. And that is also a beautifully made chronograph with a rose gold movement, beautiful movement as well. And it's one of those things where I believe that watch is about 10 grand more than this one. And what you're getting for that extra 10 grand is a bracelet. You're getting a design that I think feels more inspired, feels newer. Although on paper it's a 44 millimeter, to me it actually wears better than this watch does. The way it integrates and the way it sits on wrist. The actual finishing of the watch to me is better executed, or more within harmony with its own design language and the luxury item that it's trying to be perceived as. It just does it better. So if it's one of those things where if I had 80 grand to spend and I specifically wanted a chronograph, I don't think the Lange chronograph would be it. I would maybe save a little more to get something like that FP Journe, or spend less and get something like the Moser, or spend way less and get something like maybe even a precious metal Speedmaster, because it's kind of cool that the fact that you're getting a quote-unquote everyman, been to the moon type watch in a precious metal, which is kind of, an oxymoron in a sense. Is that going to be as well finished and as luxurious as this is? No, but it's also a good looking movement. It's also in precious metal, and you're saving a good chunk of change. I think this watch and Lange watches in general are for a very particular, very reserved client that identifies with this watch in some way or another. To me, this particular model didn't identify with me. I was very much in love with the Saxonia thin copper blue dial that I took a look at, and I would love to own that watch someday. But I could also see how that watch may not be appealing to some other people. So it is different strokes for different folks. There's absolutely more than one watch brand in the world to cater to different people's tastes, so this watch may or may not be for you. But anyway, those are just my thoughts, my ramblings, my opinions. Thank you as always for watching the video. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you in another one.